Today, we will introduce an immigration policy called asylum. Asylum is an ancient juridical concept under which a person persecuted by their own country may be protected by another sovereign authority for humanity and protection of human rights. According to a report from the EOIR, since 2000, as the numbers of both application and approval of asylum increase year by year, the approval for Chinese refugees has ranked top for 17 years. In some years, among the Chinese immigrants, more than half of them came to the U.S. under asylum. In this episode, we will focus on asylum and analyze this policy from the perspectives of sociologists and immigration attorneys. As defined by American law, asylum is a protection granted to foreign nationals already in the United States who meet the international definition of a refugee. A refugee is a person who is unable or unwilling to return to his or her home country and cannot obtain protection in that country due to past persecution or a well-founded fear of being persecuted on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. A threat to life or freedom is defined as persecution. Physical torture, even not fatal, can also be persecution. In addition, some injuries are not persecution, but their accumulation can be defined as persecution. 5 types of persecution. 1. Race. 2. Religion. Prohibition of worship in community, in public or private, or membership of a religion community or religious instruction. However, declaration of membership of a religion is not religious persecution. 3. Political opinion. 4. Nationality. 5. Membership in a particular social group. A particular social group is composed of members who share a common, immutable characteristic that a member cannot change. Persecution upon homosexuals falls in this category. In addition, the 1996 law amended the definition of a refugee specifically to include individuals fleeing coercive population control programs. Hence, resistance to compelling abortion or contraception can be deemed to have been persecuted on account of political opinion. Fundamentally, asylum seekers give up their nationalities due to prosecution or fear of being prosecuted, which is a political tool. However, in the sphere of U.S. immigration laws, some people without the qualification of applying for EB-5, I-130, and H-1B visas found a loophole to take advantage. So they colluded with illicit agents or attorneys to make up reasons or evidences and apply for visa based on groundless stories. In recent years, the U.S. government exerted more effort on cracking down illegal immigration cases. For example, according to the news on the FBI website, a joint investigation for asylum fraud schemes was led by the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District, the FBI, and the USCIS called Operation Fiction Writer. 28 defendants, including 8 lawyers, have been charged with participating in 9 separate but overlapping immigration fraud schemes.
Hello and welcome to Immigration to the United States. 我是美国律师施仁哥。我们今天来了2位嘉宾，可以讨论美国的移民。Gentlemen, can you introduce yourself?
My name is Rick Ross. I'm the founder and executive director of the Cult Education Institute, which is an online library database. And I also am the author of a book, Cults Inside Out, How People Get In and Can Get Out.
My name is Thomas Mayer. I'm a Los Angeles-based immigration attorney representing primarily the Chinese community.
Can claiming that being prosecuted by the government be the grounds of seeking asylum? Apart from political account, is there any other accounts for asylum seeking? Let's have immigration attorney Thomas Mayer explain this.
Well, in order to qualify for asylum, there have to be one of 5 bases, and religion is certainly one of those bases. You can also qualify under a member of a specific social group. So there are actually 2 different ways that a cult member could receive asylum here. However, it also requires that they be punished severely, extremely severely, by their local government. So if something happens in this country, no, not really, unless they were to get what's called a U visa, which would be providing testimony in an American court as a witness against somebody that has perpetrated a crime against them.
The U visa is a non-immigrant visa, which is set aside for providing temporary immigration benefits to foreign nationals and their immediate family members who are victims of crimes, suffering substantial mental or physical abuse, and are willing to assist law enforcement and government officials in the investigation or prosecution of the criminal activity. Qualifying criminal activities include, but are not limited to, abduction, blackmail, domestic violence extortion, kidnapping, murder, and rape. After 3 years of continuous physical presence in the United States, while in U non-immigration status, a U visa holder may be eligible to adjust their status and become a lawful permanent resident if certain requirements are met. On some part, the U visa is similar to asylum. They both require a petitioner to be persecuted or injured, while this feature could be abused by some visa applicants. Illegal immigrants could make up stories like claiming that the social group he is in was persecuted by the government, or a woman says she is subject of domestic violence. They try to use such accounts to cheat immigration officers.
But if you were persecuted on the basis of your ethnic group, that is one of the 5 ways that you can get asylum. The 5th way is being a member of a social group. And that would be something like Falun Gong, for example. If you practice regularly, if you believe in it, and then if your government has persecuted on the basis of your practice of it or of your beliefs of it, that would be the 5th way, as a member of a social group, the group being Falun Gong practitioners.
From the perspective of cult specialist Rick Ross, what is his opinion on this issue?
Your work just fascinates me. Can you think of anything about Chinese culture that makes Chinese either more or less susceptible to being sucked into the world of a cult?
Well, I think that for a long time religion was not part of Chinese life. And I think once that changed and Chinese culture became much more open to the idea of religion, many people were attracted to it. When you travel through China, as I have, you see Taoists, Buddhists, Christians practicing their religion. But along with the good religion, so-called religion, came some pretty bad groups that exploited people, that took advantage of people. For example, one group that I'm dealing with right now is located in the United States, but the leader immigrated from Beijing, and he encouraged his followers to sell their assets, many of them quite successful business people in China, to sell their assets and come to the U.S. on nothing more than, I think, tourist visas, with the promise that somehow they would become legally residents within the U.S. Subsequently, their money was taken from them by various schemes by this leader, which is not uncommon, and this leader greatly benefited from their assets. They, in turn, are now going to probably have to go back to China with a lot less money than they came to the U.S. with, and a great sense of betrayal that they were exploited and taken advantage of.
It is worth noting that cults do exist in the United States, but it lacks a concrete definition of cult in American legal system. They are called unconventional religion or new religion. The Americans adopt loose religion policy and uphold freedom of faith and practice religion in public. For example, the American law and regulations do not ban religious beliefs. In the United States, religious civil liberties are guaranteed by the Constitution. Laws cannot prohibit the free exercise of religion by anyone other than authorities and its officers. The American religion system makes it the country with the largest number of new religions. Although the government doesn't suppress new religions, they comply with the religion management system. First, they follow community autonomy, which set public benefit as the standard to limit practitioners' behaviors. If any religion or its members harm public benefit, then they will be punished by law. Second, even with freedom of belief, all religious activities are subject to strict rules and regulations. Meetings and demonstration of a religious group must be strictly under control of the police. Once a group or believers break a rule during the meeting or demonstration, the promoter will be punished severely.
So my issue with religious groups is, do they hurt people? Because if they don't hurt people, who cares? And for that matter, there is a real similarity in the United States and China, which is that both governments care about groups that hurt people. For example, in the United States, there are groups called cults that have taken advantage of people financially, or children have died from medical neglect as a result of the group's belief system. In China, similar things have happened. So each government takes an interest in that sense. The difference, though, between the U.S. and China, which is profound, is that the United States was founded on the principle of religious freedom, and in fact, many of the people that immigrated to the United States came here in order, for religious freedom. Whereas in China, the issue is harmony and to be harmonious within the society. And religion is seen more as a privilege granted by the government to those who uphold it in such a way as to be in harmony and not to cause social disruption. So there is a real cultural gap there between how the Chinese perceive religion and its function within their society and how we see it in the United States.
This is a big problem for me. As someone who represents Chinese people, I see a lot of cases involving fraud. I'm a lawyer for the victims of fraud. And culturally, for Chinese people, a lot of them say, "Oh, 我不好意思，我受骗，我真的很难受，是我的错." Chinese often tend to internalize mistakes and take too much responsibility for things. And they say, well, I am shy and embarrassed about the fact that I have been defrauded because I believe that this is a weakness on my part. And, I always have to tell them, look, people who defraud other people, people who lead cults, same thing, they're good at it. Otherwise they'd be in some other area of business. Every single person who's been defrauded, when they first met the person that defrauded them, they said, wow, this is the most honest guy or woman I've ever met. Do you find that there's a lot of financial fraud aspects that your clients have been victims of in your immigration practice?
A tremendous amount, and it's to the point where it's actually frightening. Give you an example. There was an attorney that was in the building that I'm in. His assistant took a bribe and said she was going to give, I think it was $10,000 to a judge to fix a case. She did not tell the attorney. She took the money, kept it. The case went on. The client only learned later that he had been cheated, but when asked to come forth and explain to the police what had happened, he was too embarrassed. He just walked away from it and said, no, I've been burned. That's the end of it. I have a new attorney now. A few years ago, I had a discussion with a local immigration service officer, and he told me that they have estimated, now this is going back maybe 5 years, well, probably closer to 10 years, that in the San Gabriel Valley, immigration fraud is a $750 million a year business. Now, these are people that are relatively unsophisticated. Some of them are well-educated, but for the most part, not. They're smuggled here or have arranged through a middleman to get a U.S. visa.
Why do the victims of fraud choose to keep silent? Tom told us some important reasons. Some visa applicants, maybe, from the very beginning, have known that they are getting a U.S. visa through an illegal channel. However, for obtaining a green card, they had to take a risk. Once there was a problem, they thought it was bad luck. Immigration to the U.S. has formed a huge profit chain. All sorts of defrauders took advantage of the eagerness of visa applicants to make big money. For example, some cults created lies about believers being prosecuted in their own country, so as to cheat American government and get legal status, and then sell it to Chinese immigrants. This method became a way for them to make money. It is reported that the U.S. CIS and other departments launched operations to crack down on cult frauds and sued several lawyers involved in such cases at the end of 2012. Rick also found such scams during his cult studies.
In the case that I'm involved in, it was all done under the guise of religion. The man claimed to be a Qigong master. He claimed to be able to focus ki energy and move it within the bodies of his devotees. He claimed that he was the one and only true Qigong master, and that he literally wrote a book about curing cancer. So many of his victims that were Chinese were dying from cancer, and he would bleed them financially. In the case that I'm involved in, I saw a check that was written by a businessman from Beijing for $800,000 US. And ultimately, all he was able to get back after suing this individual was about $300,000. But what he wanted to do was to have a report done and to have it corroborated by the other victims in the hopes of preventing this from happening again and again. And I would have to reiterate what you've said. These kind of people are predatory. They're in the business to take advantage of people, exploiting, if you will, their most deepest held convictions and idealistic feelings, so that these folks feel, I'm doing this for God, or I'm doing this for a higher power, or I'm doing this to help my family. And then they use that as a cover to trick people. And I think the people that are victimized should not be ashamed any more than a rape victim should be ashamed. It's on the rapist or the predator that the shame belongs. I remember the psychologist Margaret Singer, who was from California. She was nominated for a Nobel for her studies on schizophrenia, and she was a friend of mine. And when I was dealing with a particular group here in the U.S. called the Waco Davidians,
the Branch Davidians.
Yes, and I was working for CBS News at the time as an analyst, dealing with the standoff. It was a 51-day standoff with a group that was called a cult that the government had raided in regards to illegal weapons stockpiling, and then they had a 51-day standoff that ended with the group leader killing himself and all of the members of the group. And I talked to Margaret and I said, Margaret, what do you think? Is this leader, David Koresh, is he a psychopath? And she said to me, Rick, they're all psychopaths. And she said it's like a
job requirement.
Job requirement, which is a person who has no empathy, no sympathy, no conscience. In studying some of the groups that I have from China, I see these people that call themselves Qigong masters, and I'm not disputing that there are Qigong masters and that there is a tradition in China regarding Qigong and ki energy, but these people use it as a facade, as a mask, if you will, to just defraud people. And the intensity of the fraud, the devastation to the families that I've seen and that I've talked with, it tells me again and again that these people have no conscience, that they have no empathy, no sympathy, and that they fit that profile of like a malignant narcissist, a psychopath, that many mental health professionals have said, cult leaders, that's the job requirement. You have to be like that in order to run a destructive cult.
According to Rick's analysis, some American religious groups deceived devotees with pompous statements for the purpose of making a profit. Some cults even confronted the government and killed its members, causing tremendous harm to American families and society.
I think that in terms of obtaining a grant of asylum, that it has been such a long-standing practice or tradition to lie to government authorities, whether it's paying taxes or bribing someone, but that the law is not necessarily the law. That if you have the money, if you have the resources, if you have the influence, that you can dispense with the law and get the justice, as it were, that you seek.
In regard to asylum, certain cults in America use their statuses to make it convenient for immigration fraud, which violates the immigration law in the U.S. Such behaviors should draw more and more attention, so that under the control of the American legal system, cults in the name of religion cannot be unscrupulous.
What do you see about this? Do you see, like, in terms of cults, do cults extract, this is something that interests me, do cults extract contractual agreements?
Well, Scientology is famous for their 1 billion year contract. So they have a contract with members in Scientology that they will serve the organization in this life and in future lives through reincarnation. But
Can you get specific performance on that?
I don't think Tom Cruise has signed one of those contracts, even though he's a Scientologist.
He has a better legal team.
He has a much better legal team. I think what is the difference in China and the United States is that in China, a group called a cult can be declared illegal and be declared a destructive cult, and the leaders are held accountable for the group. Whereas in the United States, individuals under the influence of a leader may commit criminal acts, but they will be held individually accountable, and the leader may escape accountability. So in China, in a sense, there is that communal responsibility. But in the United States, which emphasizes individual rights and individual prosecution, cults are approached crime by crime. So if you have not committed a crime, even though other members of your group may have in the past, you are not held accountable and the group is not held accountable. This is somewhat changing now in the United States because there are groups that believe that no child should receive medical care, and a number of children have died. And in Pennsylvania right now, there is a leader of a group that is facing criminal indictment because of his influence over parents who allowed their child to die. So that separation in the United States is somewhat being questioned more now in regards to children's rights.
Well, we have, there are a couple ways the law in the United States deals with problems. One is importuned. In other words, the leader importuned or directed these people to engage in the wrongful conduct in which they engage. And the other is conspiracy. When conspiracy was first introduced in the United States, and I know I'm not telling you anything, there was a lot of, whoa, you can't have conspiracy, you're punishing people for their thoughts. But, we've become more and more comfortable with the idea that those who plan the wrongful conduct are every bit as guilty as those who execute the wrongful conduct, perhaps even more so.
Yes. Yeah, it seems to me that there are groups in the U.S. that basically they also have contacts within China. This particular group that I've been looking at recently, they have a base in China, and then they also have a base in the United States. So what they're doing is feeding people from China to the U.S. Now what's interesting is these are educated Chinese, they're wealthy Chinese, because this group wants their money. So what they're doing is they're not really preying upon ignorance so much as they are a sense of idealism, a sense of wanting to serve a higher power, and the leader then convinces them that the only way they can serve that higher power is to be with the supreme leader who is in the United States. I think of it really as a kind of a con game, because once these people come to the U.S., they are separated from their money. And whatever arrangements are made in marriages, which are ordained by the leader, who will have a marriage with whom, who will get divorced, and to some extent that can affect immigration status, resident status, a green card. That becomes a means by which this particular leader would then leverage the Chinese citizen and use the American resident in the group as a means to get their money. So I think it really was just a horrible fraud. And I think that there are many groups that exploit people like that. For example, the Falun Gong group in the United States and Canada has about estimated 10,000 followers. Many of those are very wealthy Chinese who live in Canada. Because if you recall, there was that immigration wave from Hong Kong to Canada, and Canada said, give me your wealthy. Buy a great house in Vancouver and Toronto, and they came, and they did do very well in Canada. And so what you see is Falun Gong or Li Hongzhi targeting the Chinese as opposed to anyone else. and targeting them as a particular population to prey upon and to exploit. And that's what I've seen.
Nowadays, the examination is getting stricter and stricter, so applicants shall get their visa through legal ways, rather than cheating the government with excuse of asylum or claiming as religious members being prosecuted for obtaining a green card. All applications shall be based on fact. This is the end of this episode, and many thanks to Mr. Justin Schringer, Mr. Rick Ross, and Mr. Thomas Mayer. See you next time. Bye.